Zen Gateway Talks. Form practice and Zen training. Hello and welcome to the Zen Gateway Talks. Today we're going to talk about cultivating form and the importance of form in Zen training. And to kick off, we have an extract from our old friend, Master Sokean, who trained in America and taught in America in the 1930s and founded the first Zen Institute of Zen in America. So, in one place he says, "In America, when we meet a friend, we shake hands. The strength is in the arm. When you walk on the street, you should put strength in the abdomen and walk straight. Some people give the impression of being intoxicated. Their walk is so weak. A gentleman or lady must cultivate dignity. Therefore you must practice the shape of meditation whenever you have time. People who cannot keep this shape are very undignified. They come to a house as a guest, and very soon are leaning back with their feet up on a chair. Such slouching is undignified. Naturally, there are formal, semi-formal, and informal attitudes, but even the so-called informal has a kind of formality." This is an extract from a sermon called The Shape of Meditation, which can be found in a book, a collection of his sermons called The Zen Eye by Sokean, which has been put out by the first Zen Institute in America, based in New York City. We've had similar talks on this before, but it's always worth going over the form. I remember my own late teacher, Master Dayu, saying categorically, without good form, the Zen training cannot be done, cannot be undertaken, meaning that the insights that it leads to as well, koan training, all that sort of stuff, even meditation, even good meditation, can't be done. And she was always at great lengths to be very clear about what she meant by good form. And she would often start off by saying, look, everything has a natural form. Perhaps best if you look at a cat, for example. A cat, when it sits or runs or stands or jumps, climbs, lies down, or cleans itself, has a certain shape to it. There's a certain shape that it shares with other cats as well. And she said this is an example of a natural form. She says if you look at a human baby as well, when it first learns to sit up, before perhaps it can walk, when a baby sits on the floor, its back is quite straight. It sits up quite straight. It's only usually when we sort of perhaps enter our teen years, maybe around there, that we sort of develop this slouch. And it's almost as if the body seems to lack a strength, a shape. It's almost as if it becomes partially deflated. And she was very keen that in all the activities that we do, and classically there are what are known as the four positions in Buddhist training, you find them in the Satipatthana. They're called sitting, standing, walking, and lying down. And the Buddha said in the Satipatthana Sutta that in these four positions the monk is always fully aware and living and alive in these four positions. Monks are not supposed to slouch. I have seen members of the Sangha sometimes slouching a bit, but most do not. It has to be said, whatever the tradition, they learn to cultivate an uprightness and a strength in the body. And why is this important? Because a lot of the time we spend ghosting around in our thoughts, in our heads. And when that happens, the awareness of the body vanishes or becomes depleted. And you can see this, and this is what Sokean is referring to when he says that sometimes some people give the impression of being intoxicated. Their walk is so weak. And he says when you walk on the street, you should put strength in the abdomen and walk straight. Actually, the abdomen, and particularly the lower abdomen as well, is the center of gravity of the human body. And I remember when learning Kinhin, which is walking meditation in Zen, we walk with that full awareness there in that part of the body. We walk out of the abdomen. That is where our focus is, and the movement of the whole body, of the limbs and everything else, is comes from there. If you like, our heart settles there. I do not watch myself walk, and if I am watching myself walking, then the walking becomes stiff and stilted even. I remember, you can find on the Zen Gateway, there's the interview that we did with Mado Moore, and also the review of his book, precisely on this form of training. The book was called Hidden Zen, and he does a lot of work on this sort of hara. Certainly, there's a lot of exercises in there, but in the first few exercises are all based on this hara, and that this is where the strength comes from. Now, Mado Moore has a martial arts background, which is probably why this is something that he's very aware of how effective it is. But actually, in all Zen training, it's all like this. We learn from the sitting, the standing, the walking, the bowing, and so forth. That all these things come from being wholeheartedly present and living in the body, and particularly in the trunk of the body, and particularly in the abdomen and the lower abdomen as well. That's very important as well. And just to say that, but when this talk goes out, we will very soon be putting up some new videos that we recently made on the Zen Gateway on how to sit Zazen, how to bow, and also how to move around the Zendo. And these are all these all have elements of good form in them, particularly how to bow and how to move around the Zendo. Even if you're used to going around a Zendo, go and take a look at them, because they'll give you that sense of the importance that we place on good form, particularly with the bowing as well. When we learn to be wholehearted in the body, then we are present in the present moment. That's because the body is always here and now. It's never anywhere else. The thoughts can always be ghosting about the past and the future, but the body is always in the here and now. And the body doesn't think. If the body is pure sensation, there's the physical senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and then there's also the inner sense of the orientation of the body, and the awareness of the body, and of course the tactile sensations that come in through the body as well. And all these things are always in the here and now. They're always present. And if we come back and give ourselves into them, then we are present. Automatically, we are back into the here and now. Now, the importance of the form as well, because when it comes to the bowing and so forth, actually, if you look at it, you can see that none of the activities that the monks do, for example, are unusual for a human body. In fact, they're very stylized forms that the human body naturally makes. And this is something that, when animals become trained, like if you think of horses, for example. Master Dayu was a horsewoman, and she rode horses as a young woman, and so she was very aware of the training of horses. She was Austrian as well, and so in Austria they have the Viennese riding school, the Spanish riding school there. And if you've ever seen that, you can see some of the horses doing these very stylized movements. And she was sitting watching this with a friend of hers who wasn't a horse rider, and this chap said, "Is this really natural for these horses?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "None of the movements you see them doing here would be absent if you watch them in the meadow for long enough." She said, "They will all do these movements, but it's just that they're trained and they're stylized in a certain way." So in that way, you could train what is natural. There's nothing wrong with that. You can just train what is natural, and that is what happens in the Zendo as well. And there's something quite important about that. And what's important about that is that in my habits, in my habitual deportment and in my habitual posture, there's a lot of energy that either gets wasted or gets tied up into those habits. And when we go into a Zendo, or when we go into a Zen training place, we are asked to conform to the forms of the place that we go to. And the Zen monk will be judged on his or her ability to be able to conform to those new forms. Because in order to do that, one has to learn to drop my own preferred way of doing it and adopt the form of the place in which we are in. And that ability, that fluidity, that ability to switch from my own to let go of that. Not only is that a practice of letting go, obviously, but it's also a practice of really learning to give myself wholeheartedly into it. And a lot of form training that takes place, particularly in the martial arts as well, is based on that too. If anyone has ever read the classic Zen and the Art of Archery by Herigel, they'll know the point in the story when he wants to train in Zen. He was a German. He wants to train in Zen, and he was told that perhaps it might be better, as someone who was unused to Japanese culture and unused to Zen, that he should try an indirect route through one of these martial arts which had been influenced by Zen. And so he took up archery, and the sensei, the teacher, took him on, and all the training the emphasis was on the form, how you pick up how you move, how you walk, how you kneel, how you pick up the bow, how you notch the arrow, and how you extend the arrow to full tension. And then the instruction was that you just hold it there and you do not fire the arrow. The arrow will release itself when it's ready. And this is quite hard to do. And Herigel had real difficulty with it, so he asked if he could take the bow home with him, and he did, and he took it back and he practiced. And what he found was that if he altered the hand position just very slightly, the arrow would go of itself. So the following week he went back and he showed this, and when the arrow flew, the sensei said, "Do it again," and he did it again, and the arrow flew. And the master, it said, turned his back on him, which meant that rejected him, and not only that, he was basically being thrown out of the club. And it took a lot of negotiation to get him back into the club. A lot of intermediaries had to go and petition and ask for forgiveness. And when Herigel was allowed back into the dojo, all the sensei said to him was, "You have a much too willful will." Wow. You have a much too willful will. And that was just because he'd obviously seen that he had disobeyed the instruction and had used his own hand position in order to make it easier for him. He couldn't understand, he didn't recognize the value of what he was being taught. The correct way of doing it was much more valuable than, as it were, faking it, which is what he was doing. So this is the same as well. Learning to let go also means, at the same time, we learn to give ourselves wholeheartedly into the new form, into what at this moment is being done. And that giving myself wholeheartedly is the same as samadhi. Samadhi being the Sanskrit term for at oneness, or being at one with what is being done. This is meditation. That is exactly, meditation is called samadhi. It's on the Noble Eightfold Path. So that ability to be able to give myself wholeheartedly into the forms is very much part of it. And when we look, for example, at if we're in a training place, or sometimes you can go on and see films of monks doing cleaning, for example, like when they clean the floor, what they do is that they take hold of a cloth. They're at one end of the room of the wooden floorboards. They're bare feet. They crouch down. They lean forward so that their hands holding the cloth are on the floor in front of them, and their weight, as it were, begins to push the cloth along the floor, and they run with their back legs, they kick with their back legs, and they run the full length of the floor like that. And you have to do it, you have to run, otherwise you'll fall and go flat on your face. And this is done deliberately. This way of doing it is done deliberately because it requires that running requires a real wholehearted effort. Otherwise, you do fall flat on your face. And in this way, it becomes very energetic. Because the cleaning itself is a training, and the cleaning is extremely thorough. Their movements, if you look at them, their movements are very energized indeed. Their wholeness is very much there, and it's the same when they wake up in the morning as well. Someone goes running around, ringing the bell, shouting, "Wait, get up, get up, get up, get up!" And everybody springs out of bed at full pelt, and then you dash to the pipe. You've got your flannel, and you wet it slightly, and then you just wipe your face and your hands, and you rinse your mouth out, and then it's straight to the chanting. Everything is done very fast. These are young people, but that everything is very energetic, and it's focused. And when that's coupled with the rest of the training, they don't get a lot of sleep, they don't get a lot of food. All their desires get concentrated down to just wanting to sleep and wanting to eat. And really nothing else matters. Everything else just literally gets crushed out of them. And this way they learn wholeheartedness. They learn sometimes what's called one-pointed concentration, but frankly wholeheartedness gives a much better appreciation of the state that they are cultivating. And once that has really been learned into the body in that way, then it's always with them. It's like riding a bike. And even when they go out into the world, if they do become a little bit sort of half-hearted, they can snap back into it extremely quickly. And as soon as we are wholehearted, then suddenly everything opens out. There's that quiet spaciousness, and that quiet spaciousness can be taken anywhere. It can be go into Zazen, go into insight training, go into being of benefit to all sentient beings, the great Bodhisattva vow as well. And this is all done through the power of restraint. Master Dai, a great eminent Chinese Chan master, says in one of his letters, he says, if you want strength, then first you must conserve it. And he goes on to say that unfortunately people are very leaky. And what he meant by that is our energy is sort of disparate. It's all over the place. We get bored easily, we get distracted easily, we're walking down the street whilst thinking 1,001 other things. This is the strength not being in the abdomen anymore. We're shaking hands with somebody, and we're perhaps wondering, who are they, or what do I think of them? And whilst all that's going on, the strength isn't in the hand and in the arm. The sincerity, the wholeheartedness isn't there. Later on in this passage, I haven't included it here, but later on in this passage, Sokean says that he knew a Zen master who did not look through the side of his eyes. If he spoke to you, he turned the whole of his upper body to face you. And if you try that, it's actually quite a little bit intimidating if you really do it. And it's interesting, if you're talking to somebody, and you might notice this when you're talking to somebody, just, I don't know, about the weather or something like that, people will often turn their heads to you and sort of, look at you and nod along. But their bodies may actually be facing in a different direction. But if you suddenly say something that either upsets them or interests them, then quite often they'll suddenly turn the whole of their body to face you, not just the head. There's a whole, when the passions come in, and don't forget the energy of the passions is also the energy of the Buddha nature as well. Suddenly it animates the whole body. But what we learn to do is by animating the whole body, then that energy itself becomes present, is also evoked as well, and it informs this form. So energy, the whole point of this training is that this energy is dynamic, and we are don't forget, we are transforming in an alchemical fashion, if you like. The ability of the energy not to be dispersed in my habits, in my half-heartedness, in my wants and my not wants, and all that sort of judgments, my judgments, and so forth. We are learning to, as it were, reclaim that energy back into the present moment, into the body in the present moment, and then it being of service to the situation, whatever that situation actually is. Um, it's quite sort of normal, but it takes a great effort to really make that practice. So, there are little exercises that we can use, or that we can use in order to help with that, to help not dissipate that energy, but to allow it to really sort of build up. Apart from that, learning to do those physical jobs in a wholehearted way and really keeping ourselves going to, how it is, you set yourself a task maybe to sweep the garden, and you do a little bit, and then you sort of wander around, and you sort of stop and look around and think about something, and then do a little bit more, and then stop and look around, and think, oh, well, maybe I'll come back and do this later, or maybe I can think of something else to do, and then I go and do something else and then forget about it. We really just keep doing that job until it's completed. And that way we just learn to stay with the doing of it, the actual doing of it. Another way, perhaps in a slightly more formal way, is when we do the chanting as well. Chanting easily shows when we're being half-hearted about it. It's sort of Makahanya Haramita Kanji Zaibos. Instead, and it's all from the top, it's all from the sort of top of the chest. Instead, if we take a deep breath, Kanji Zaibo Gyojin Hanya Haramita, and so on. It's suddenly there's a fullness to the sound. As well, there's a wholeness to the sound. It's a quality, and we learn to listen out and to sense that quality when we are being wholehearted and when we are being half-hearted, and then we come back to that wholeheartedness. But there are other things as well. In our general deportment, if we're slovenly and sort of like a sack of potatoes in everything that we do, and we sort of stomp around, we can see that energy is not being very well contained. It sort of knocks into things. It's hasty. Or on the other side, it's extremely hesitant. That's the other extreme. Instead, there needs to be a contained wholeheartedness that comes through in those things. I remember a couple of things that we were trained to do in the temple. One was that when we sat, we learned to sit still. We didn't fidget and move about, and that can be quite hard because there are small little aches and pains in the body that come up, but it doesn't matter. We learn to just sit through them, and that endurance, that patient endurance, which is one of the 6 paramitas, one of the 6 bodhisattva practices, builds up resilience, actually builds up the physical stamina and the strength to contain that energy. The other thing was that when we were giving talks, and in fact when we were talking generally, say around the dining room table, we didn't use our hands to speak, and that's quite hard. And you may think, well, why do that? What's wrong with you? There's nothing wrong with using it per se, but learning to restrain the hands, learning to as it were, restrain a particular habit, even to just some extent, you can feel that energy beginning to build up in the body. It wants, as it were, to disport itself into the old habit. So there's nothing moral about this. There's nothing. There's no good or bad about this. This is simply an exercise in restraining the energy, and restraining the impulses that want us to do our that wants us to do these things. And in this way, we begin to find that the energy begins to settle down. After a while, it stops wanting to escape, wanting to become distracted. It then becomes there at the disposal of the situation. And in this way, it's made it's humanized. And it's humanized because the human form is the form we are already born into. This is the given. And energy is dynamic. All energy is dynamic. And whatever form it touches, it brings to life, it animates. As we have the human form, then the human form is what is animated. If you remember on the Wheel of Life, you have those 6 realms, and only one of them is human. The others are the gods, fighting demons, animal realms, hell realms, and the hungry ghosts. And those 5 ahuman realms, which represent the passions in the passions incarnating in their various forms and as various beings, they become less and less dominant and become attenuated. And instead, as the energy begins to settle down, it flows into the human realm. And we remember that the Buddha himself said that only from the human realm is liberation actually possible. But first we have to become that fully human, and that means with the warmth of the human heart, as well as with the clarity of seeing. Okay, well, we'll leave it there for now. If you're listening to this Dharma talk in November 2021 when it was first released, then I want to just advise you about a new chapter that's opening up on the Zen Gateway. The beginning of last year, we sent out a survey, and one of the questions asked if people were attending either a Dharma center, meditation group, or a temple. Over 50% of our listeners weren't, and we thought that perhaps we could do something about it. In a few weeks' time, we're going to be starting on a new chapter for the Zen Gateway. That is an online community, the Zen Gateway online community. We'll be featuring Dharma courses, streamed Zazen meditation periods, an opportunity to speak one-to-one with a teacher, and also a place really where people can interact with each other who are involved in the training and want to meet other like-minded people as well. So if you're interested, or if you think this sounds like something that could be of interest to you, then for now what I would suggest is that you go on over to the zengateway.com, and there on our home page you will see you can sign up to our weekly newsletter, and it's through this that we will be able to keep you up to date with the project, how it's going, and when it will be launched. So if you want more information, feel free to email me as well at rinzai@thezengateway.com. That's Rinzai, RINZAI, at thezengateway.com. But if you subscribe to our newsletter, we'll certainly be giving you all the news that you need through there. Thank you for listening.